Ever since my first year in high school, fall has been a strong contender for one of my favorite seasons. As soon as that first chill of early fall comes in as the summer days wane, I immediately find myself beginning to feel nostalgic for a lot of my favorite games which I happened to be playing around that time of the year back in those days. Arguably, the first of these games were games of the Zelda franchise. With the exception of Wind Waker, which is a summer game for me, the classic Zelda games going back to the NES, SNES, Game Boy, and N64 are all games that are evocative of the fall season. So, when The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was announced to be a late September release, I felt it was something of a call to action for me to get the game on launch and play through it. This would be a milestone for me, since this would surprisingly be the first Zelda game I would ever buy the day it came out, and one of the very few games I would get immediately on release in general. For Echoes of Wisdom, I was immediately drawn by the concept that this was the first official Zelda game released by Nintendo where you actually play as the titular character, Zelda. As a kid, I was always a little confused how all the games except for The Adventures of Link were all called Zelda when the hero you played as was actually called Link and you were supposed to save Zelda. In any event, save for the CDI games where you play as Zelda, this is the first time you play as her in an official Nintendo release in the series' history, as far as I'm aware. I got it on launch, but actually, I was still finishing my Uma Musume playthrough at the time, and I wanted to get that video finished first so I could put all my energy into Echoes of Wisdom. But finally, late Saturday night, with my video for the week all scripted, recorded, edited, and uploaded, I could finally fire up the Switch and see what this new Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, had to offer. This video may contain spoilers, so if you would like to avoid them, I'll put a timestamp here to skip them. Please feel free to do so if you like. My plan here isn't to do a plot summary, but instead, I want to touch on some of the story themes as it pertains to the individual storylines surrounding each dungeon in the game. I was always one of those people who generally didn't pay attention to stories in games, especially when I was a kid. Unless it was animated, unskippable cutscenes that had voice acting, generally, you would find me skipping them and moving on to the next level. I actually still do that even today with games like Snowbreak Containment Zone and games with visual novel elements like Mirror, for example. This was no exception with Zelda games. Back when I was a kid, I found myself mashing the A button through the text boxes thinking it was all just flavor text when important information would be dropped about where I was supposed to go next and how I was to get there, and I would find myself stuck and, well, quitting soon after. I'm not entirely different in my habits now, but I do my utmost to take my time with games like these, to take in what the games have to say so that I can get the most of everything the game has to offer. The story sees Zelda exploring a fairly close HD recreation of the same map featured in Link to the Past, going through the Gerudo Desert, the Zoro Domains, the volcanic, hazardous landscapes of the Gorons, the regal Hylian castle town, the wetlands of the Deku Scrubs, and the snow-capped frozen peaks of holy Mount Lanardiu. In each of these areas, you encounter a handful of characters who all have their own personal crises unfolding related directly to the rifts opening up across Hyrule. The Gerudo Desert is in crisis, as the rifts are continuing to expand on Gerudo territory and tirelessly bringing with them waves of monsters that are driving the Gerudo warriors to exhaustion. One of these warriors is their commander, who finds herself almost succumbing to the onslaught before Zelda comes in to save her. Zelda convinces her that the rift can be closed if she is allowed to enter the Gerudo's underground sanctuary, and that she will be able to close the rifts that continue releasing the monsters. The problem is that, in the interest of inhibiting the ability for the monsters to invade with greater numbers, the sanctuary was filled in with sand and the entrance is blocked off by an armed guard on orders from the Gerudo chief herself to not allow anyone through. The Gerudo chief, as we quickly discover later, is actually the commander's mother, and there is a disagreement between herself and the chief about the legitimacy of Zelda's claimed ability to seal rifts. This is especially fueled under the insistence of the chief's right-hand advisor, who is more in favor of maintaining the status quo and expresses a visceral suspicion at the veracity of Zelda's claims. The mother versus daughter dynamic, where the mother, from an outsider's perspective, is completely reasonable in her skepticism of Zelda's claims. Meanwhile, the commander, we know, is right to trust Zelda and that Zelda does have the ability to seal rifts. When it becomes apparent that Zelda does have the ability to help people, despite the chief's right-hand advisor being suspiciously, staunchly against trusting Zelda, the chief decides to trust her. They go to seal one of the smaller rifts, and the act of sealing the rift proves the right-hand advisor was an echo. It proves to the chief that her daughter was right all along. Sometimes experience that comes with age can't trump the judgment and intuition of someone younger. Every dungeon story has its own plot of this kind. The Zora have two different kinds, the Sea Zora and the River Zora. Both the Zora are followers of Jabu Jabu and perform music for him. Each Zora has their different style of music, where the River Zora make music with brass instruments whose sound resembles that of a trombone, and the Sea Zora make music with string and wind instruments reminiscent of harps and flutes. The two leaders of each Zora clan often quarrel over the way the other makes and performs music. While they always make up in the end, this time is particularly bad. With Jabu Jabu on a mysterious rampage, and with the rifts opening up and devouring whole parts of sacred Zora territory, all of these things are only making the fight between these two worse. The growing division between the Zora leaders lead them to compete against each other, with their music creating a cacophony that only worsens Jabu Jabu's condition. It's only when the two can play their music together in harmony that we are able to gain entry into Jabu Jabu's den and free him from the rift, thereby sealing said rift. The Zora leaders are able to come to appreciate the other's music by seeing the kind of purpose one could fill that the other can't quite. Using the power of each of their own music to help members of the other's clan through the residual psychological issues left by the traumatic experiences they just went through shows the other leader just how much each race of Zora complements the other. It's kind of like yin and yang. Rivers feed the oceans, and the oceans bring rain to the rivers. At the end of this crisis, the two clan leaders' friendship becomes stronger than ever before. The King of Hyrule is a very protective father, but despite his absolute power and influence over his armies, he can't even assure his own safety, let alone his daughter's. His whole story arc is coming to the realization that for the first time in his life, he's the one who must put his faith into and rely upon his daughter to become the priestess, as was foretold in a prophecy revealed to him by Impa. Visiting the Gorons, you quickly discover that they have a new leader who is the son of the previous leader. The new leader walks around with a tablet, which he calls his father's 56 nuggets of wisdom. Whenever faced with making any decision, he consults this tablet. He suffers from a crippling sense of self-doubt. He doesn't feel as though he was ready for this position, but it is now his responsibility to take it on. And the fact that people count on him to make important decisions in this time of crisis, when the rifts are slowly swallowing up their homeland, he goes with Zelda and Trio to help them on their way to the rift's entrance. By the end of the adventure, he has decided to move on from the constant consultation of his father's nuggets of wisdom. He has sacrificed his father's portrait and the tablet he earlier couldn't imagine parting with. He realizes that his competence was with him the whole time, and his self-doubt and imposter syndrome were unfounded. He becomes a more confident and overall more effective leader as a result, rising to his father's former position in earnest. Going to the wetlands in the south where the Deku Scrubs live in relative isolation, they enjoy all of the small new fads of the time as they come. The rifts, despite eating away at their land and people, also bring spiders, which spin webs that Deku Scrubs find make for perfect cotton candy making material. The Sweet Spot, which is a members-only club for those to go to for all-you-can-eat sweets, is home to the Rift entrance, and because of that, the spawn point of the spiders. This means that all the members can spin and eat all the cotton candy they want. But the Deku Scrubs hold strictly to their rules and forbid you from entering the Sweet Spot unless you have a membership card. Zelda ends up helping a Deku Scrub whose house was devoured by a smaller rift, who, after Zelda's harrowing escape from the Deku Scrub prison for committing the crime of sealing the rift and thereby undermining the Deku Scrub supply of cotton candy, the house owner thanks you with their membership card for the Sweet Spot. After sealing the giant rift, the Deku Scrubs rediscover their love for smoothies. They forget about cotton candy and realize that what they already had was just as good, or if not better, than the fad the bad thing brought them. While not all the Deku Scrubs ever learned the importance of figuring the order of their priorities, they do at the very least realize just how good they had it before the bad thing that came tricked them into thinking it was better just because it was new. High on holy Mount Lanadu lives a family of big woolly creatures. The one you encounter is called Konde. Konde lives on Mount Lanadu with his older brother and his father. He mentions that his brother went on an adventure on his hot air balloon and left Konde in the care of their father. You never see their father, and it becomes very clear that in the time that had elapsed since Konde's brother went on his adventure, their father had passed. Konde addresses this directly when he says that his father became a star in the sky. Konde might be large in size, but it is clear that he is still very young. Konde thought he saw his brother had returned from his adventure when he saw someone resembling him on the mountain. But when Konde tried to call after him, the one who Konde thought was his brother ran away, and Konde couldn't catch him. Konde thinks this was his brother's punishment for him for not being good because he wasn't cleaning up the rift from the mountain fast enough. After sealing the rift, Zelda and Tri discover that the creature that Konde was chasing wasn't Konde's brother, but was in just another monster. On top of that, Zelda and Tri find an inscription on the wall in a cave at the peak of Mount Lanadiu, where Konde's brother says that when he gets back, he wants to invite Konde along on his next adventure. Once Tri tells Konde this, Konde is thrilled. Despite Tri having originally promised Konde that Zelda will bring Konde's brother back home only to find out that his brother was still on his adventure, Konde is not disappointed. He looks forward to seeing his brother again and returns home in high spirits. While the overarching story of Null, the goddesses, the prime energy, and the void is great, it was these smaller stories about smaller characters and their own problems and how they were affected by the overarching plot that stuck to me the most. I couldn't help but to see a lot of myself in Darstan and his feelings of self-doubt, and Konde's relatively positive attitude and acts of kindness towards Zelda and Tri, despite being in circumstances that would cause anyone else to completely shut down, was admirable to me in a way that is inexplicable. These smaller stories taking part within the larger context of the main plot about the existential threat of Null, the echoes, and the rifts makes me think that this is why people choose to do all the side quests in Majora's Mask. I'll call myself out here now so everyone can cry sacrilege, but yes, as of making this video, I haven't played through Majora's Mask yet. But playing through Echoes of Wisdom, especially after having played through Link to the Past, really gave me a deeper appreciation for this version of Hyrule and the characters who live in it. While I didn't complete all of the side quests here, I did do a few of them, and the character writing and their stories give the player such a strong incentive to do the side quests that electing to do them just feels natural. In a modern gaming landscape so full of vast open worlds with nothing special in them, a game like Echoes of Wisdom comes in to show that the lost art to creating games with large open worlds doesn't have to be, and in fact, isn't a lost art at all. The aspect of Echoes of Wisdom that intrigued me the most was the direction it took with gameplay. In most of the previous Zelda games before the advent of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the basic underlying structure of those games was defined by visiting dungeons, typically in some predefined order, where you collect new tools or weapons that you will need to solve puzzles in the future dungeons, or, at the very least, the next dungeon. The dungeons themselves then present players with puzzles which usually require the use of these tools to solve them and make progress in the dungeon to the bosses, and the puzzles usually had only one solution. Echoes of Wisdom shares a lot of similarities with the older Zelda games in that the game reintroduces the traditional dungeons, which were controversially absent in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. However, the way the dungeons are handled is very different. Zelda only has a couple of tools at her disposal to help her through the entire game. The main one is a staff given to her by Tri. This staff allows her the ability to copy objects and defeated enemies, which she can then summon in the form of echoes. Objects can be used to help navigate platforming challenges and solve dungeon puzzles, and previously defeated creatures can help fight and or distract or even defeat other enemies for you, including bosses. The number of objects and creatures you can create at any one time depends on their cost in triangles. Triangles trail behind Tri, and as you progress through the game and seal rifts, the number of triangles Tri carries can increase, or the cost of certain creatures and objects can decrease, allowing for Tri to allow Zelda more flexibility with what she can summon or create at any given time, depending on the challenge she faces. Zelda is also granted the ability to grab and carry one object at a time by shooting Tri at it. This can be a little tricky because the distance between Zelda and the object can only be changed by using the environment. The object is effectively weightless and can be placed anywhere by having Zelda walk or jump to place what she's carrying where it needs to be. This allows her to free treasure chests that are buried in the sand as well. Of course, it doesn't work through walls or anything, but in some cases it is required for some puzzles and can work on bosses as well. Zelda does have access to Link's sword, bow, and bombs as well, but it is something that can only be activated and used for a limited period of time. Use of these weapons are tied to an energy gauge that gradually drains as long as you are using them. Judicious use of Link's weapons is recommended since refilling your energy gauge requires either potions, smoothies, or hoping enemies drop blue crystals. This incentivizes the player to work with Zelda's toolset as the default rather than trying to play as much as possible as Link. Because of this simplified toolset, Echoes of Wisdom ends up being one of the most open-ended Zelda games I've personally experienced. Because almost every object and every enemy can be used as echoes, you are pretty much assured to have the tools to solve the puzzles dungeons present you with, even if they might not be the intended solution. I remember I had a moment with this game after finishing the Deku dungeon. That dungeon is probably the most open-ended dungeon in the whole game, featuring 4 different entrances which can each be approached in whatever order you choose. I decided to watch a video to see how someone else finished the dungeon, and was amazed that they went about some of the puzzles in a very different way than I did. Seeing this, I realized just how much potential replayability Echoes of Wisdom has. Because of how flexible the tools at your disposal are, and how simple some of the puzzles can be, it's almost a guarantee that no 2 playthroughs of this game will be the same. Yes, of course some of the dungeon puzzles still have just one solution, and your progression through the story still limits your choice of dungeon order, but when compared to something like Link to the Past, this is operating on a different level. At first I wanted to call this design genius, but that's being hyperbolic. Regardless, as a gameplay experience, Echoes of Wisdom's fun comes from coming up with creative solutions to puzzles using the tools at your disposal. Coming up with these solutions and executing them successfully is something I found extremely satisfying. This is something that a past version of me definitely would have not found captivating, but thanks to this game, I formed a deep appreciation and love for this kind of game design, and now I come away from Echoes of Wisdom only wanting more. I don't know what exactly that says, but to me it says that something was done right, and makes me think that maybe Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom might be more up my lane than I originally thought they would be. I won't talk about all the boss battles here, since some are more memorable than others. My favorite dungeon boss is the snow monster in Mount Lanadu. The snow monster boss fight follows the ice and fire theme of the dungeon, where he will don a helmet with the corresponding colors for either heat or ice. You have to rely on summoning enemies of the opposite element to break the colored spikes on his helmet to make him vulnerable to your attacks using Link's weapons. The snow monster forces you to fight him by at least in part summoning echoes, and this makes for an exciting boss fight. The final boss is one of my favorite Zelda bosses. Granted, I haven't played that many Zelda bosses, but this boss forces you to fight it only by summoning echoes of enemies to help Link fight it. Before this fight, you have the choice to give Link his weapons back. If you do, you have to face the final boss completely unarmed. Link will do everything he can to hit the boss as much as possible, but Zelda doesn't have any offensive weapons. Instead, you have to spend the boss fight dodging Null's attacks. You can just let Link do all the work, or you can summon echoes to do some damage to Null as well. This is a long boss fight in 3 phases, and despite how many hits Null can take, the constant dodging and summoning made for a consistently engaging experience. When the fight was finally over, I felt as though it was a well-earned victory, and it kind of left me wanting to fight the boss again. It was a lot of fun and very exciting. Of course, Echoes of Wisdom isn't a perfect game. Its frame rate issues are a well-documented technical issue, and it's easily noticeable. But there was one hiccup that really stuck with me in this game, and that was the last dungeon room before the final boss. This room has only one solution, and it relies on the AI controlling Link to do the thing he needs to do in order to progress to the boss. The solution is simple. Stack crates so Link can jump up to the ledge, break the wall, press the button, opening the gates so Zelda and Link can reunite. The act of stacking the boxes is overly complicated, mostly due to the fact that unless they are placed just right, Link will not climb up them. It took me much longer than it should have to get out of this room, and for a time, I was convinced I was soft-blocked somehow. After some persistence, I did manage to make it through the room, but it was a very clear low point for the game for me. It almost serves as a demonstration of what could go wrong in a situation where you have many theoretical options for solving the puzzle, but the game arbitrarily forces you to do the one that was intended. For a game which otherwise incentivized you to come up with your own solutions to these problems, this room is a little bit of a stain on an otherwise forward-thinking game. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom was a game that I was very excited for. I can say now that after playing through this game, I can make a review of a game released in the current year that I am absolutely enthusiastic for, hard stop. It might appear by its presentation as a smaller, cheap spin-off game, but it is actually a full, fat Zelda experience with all the trimmings, no expenses spared. I loved nearly every moment living in this game's world, be it platforming in the rifts, which kind of reminded me of Super Mario Galaxy, to exploring the dungeons and solving puzzles, to the boss fights, to even the stamp rally, and even trying to create new smoothie recipes. Every aspect of this game gave me something to look forward to coming back after a day of work. Even if it lacked the sweeping vistas of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, this iteration of Hyrule will likely be just as much worth revisiting as its predecessors.